You're on.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Nun Aleph in the Maseches Pesachim. Should be a quicker Daf today. So we left off the top of Nun Aleph. Actually, we sort of moved our way down to Gufa, which is 3, 6, around 9 lines from the top, smack in the middle of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. So Gufa, Gemara sort of introduces what we last discussed. So Gufa Dvarim Hamutarim Ve'acherim Nahag Behenim Isser. So things that are really, in essence, they're mutter, but other people are knowing minhag is to be machmir. So we said earlier that you can't go ahead and be matir in front of them. And we sort of had a condition on that, and the Gemara will remind us. And I'm Rav Chizda, which is Rav Chizda, because we're talking about kusim, right? Kusim over here, not the literal kusim that we discussed in the past, where there is a machlekes as to their standings, as to whether their lineage in terms of what type of gerim they were years ago, whether they converted properly or not, whether they're Jews or not. But rather, we're talking about basically people who are unlearned and not able to go ahead and differentiate between different cases, and therefore, if you go tell them it's mutter, maybe they're going to say other things are mutter also because they don't really understand halacha. So therefore, it's better just to be naheg iser and not basically tell them that really that is mutter. And well, other people know. Tanya, we're learning a brayso, so we're going to bring in 3 cases. Generally, you can have 2 brothers go ahead and bathe together. Right, bathe together is a problem of pritzes. We'll soon see later on. The Gemara will explain what's the reason. But however, in the place of Kabul, right, they were machmir not to have 2 brothers bathe together. One time there's a ma'isa with Yehuda and Hillel, who were the sons of Rabban Gamliel. The couple, they were in Kabul, and they went ahead and they were bathing together. And all the people basically scoffed at them. Right? We've never seen 2 brothers go ahead and bathe together. How could you do such a thing? V'nishmat Hillel v'yatzel lebeis hachitzon, and Hillel, basically one of the brothers, snuck out to the outer house so they wouldn't really notice, so they wouldn't see it anymore. So, and they didn't want to go ahead and basically tell them that really it's mutter, but they didn't want to go ahead and correct them. So therefore, it was something which was generally mutter, and they were noeg iser, and they weren't corrected by them, and they're not kusim. So we'll see. So right in the middle of the page, Yaitzim b'kurdakison and Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. So it says over there also another halacha, basically a parallel case. One is allowed to go ahead in these kurdakisin, basically these like sort of sandals on Shabbos, right? This type of shoe. However, in Biri, there are no not to go out in these shoes of sandals. Umaisa Yehuda of Hillel, and one time the same brothers Yehuda Hillel banav Sharon Gamliel sheyatzu bekur dakison b'Shabbos. They went out in these sandals on Shabbos. And Biri, and they're in the town of Biri, which in Biri they didn't wear them, but they themselves wore it. And then everyone basically they mocked them and says, we've never seen people wear these out in Shabbos. They took them off. They gave them to their avodim to go ahead and watch, and basically they stopped wearing them on Shabbos. But what they didn't do is they didn't correct them and say, no, actually these are mutter to go ahead and wear in Shabbos in the Rosh Hashanah. And they didn't want to tell them, really, in essence, it's mutter. And finally, a third parallel case, one is allowed to go ahead and sit on the stools or couches owned by Goyim on Shabbos, which are normally being sold. However, in Akko, they were noheg not to go ahead and sit on these couches of Nachrim that are for sale. One time, the brothers, I guess Hillel and who was his brother Hillel and Yehuda, were both the sons of Rav Gamliel. They were sitting on these couches of Nachrim and Shabbos and Akko. And everyone basically saw them. They said, we've never seen people sit on these couches on Shabbos. And Nishmat al Gabe Karka, basically they slid off and they sat on the floor instead of the couches. But they did not want to go ahead and correct them. So Gemara says, so Bnei Sayam Nami. So he said, so what's the reason over here? I thought it was only by Kusim. So he said, no, Bnei Sayam Nami Kevan Lashichu Rabban Gabayu Kusim Damo. those people, since they lived off in the far out, these far out provinces, they were unlearned. They didn't have Rabbanim by them. And therefore, that was the reason why they didn't want to correct them, because they wouldn't be able to differentiate between this and maybe other cases of wearing shoes or sitting or other cases of commerce or other cases. And therefore, they didn't want to permit them. And therefore, they had basically halachic status of kusim that is better just for them to be noheg iser than to go ahead and basically say, no, you're allowed to eat this or do this, but you can't do that. Now, the Gemara is going to explain these cases. Why were they yes? So I understand why one should not go ahead and sit on the couches of Nachrim and Shabbos, right? Because it looks like one is doing, if you're sitting on something which is for sale, it looks like you're conducting business on Shabbos, and therefore that's a reason why it should be perhaps a svar to say why it's forbidden. And also, in the case of wearing those sandals, in the case of the sandals, they might fall off, and one might go ahead and carry them for Amos and Rosh Hashanah, which is usher. But to go ahead and bathe with one's brother, my time alone, what's the reason? Why not? Kedetani, we learn Raisa. Ima kol adam reiches, a person allowed to go ahead and bathe with any other male. Chutz me aviv, the chamiv ubal imo, except for one's father, right? One's father, because when one sees his father not dressed, right? So remember that where he came from, and it'll bring about impure thoughts, or his father-in-law also. Once again, ubal imo, and also his mother's husband, also perhaps impure thoughts, ubal achaiso, and also the husband of his sister. Rabbi Yehuda matir bi'aviv mipnei kavod aviv. However, Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's mutter when it comes to the one's father, because of kavod aviv, the person won't have impure thoughts. But also labal imo, and also when it comes to the husband of his mother, also he won't have impure thoughts because of kavod aviv. Also inu v'gazer b'shneachim mishum balachaisa. And then those people, the reason why they says also to go ahead and bathe with one's brother is because they basically made a gzeira in a case of one's brother, because it's similar to one's brother-in-law, i.e. one's sister's husbands. So and Tana, we learned Tamala Yirchatzi Marabo, also in terms of respect, Talmud should not go ahead and bathe with his Rebbe. However, if he's elderly and he needs his assistance, then it is mutter to go ahead and bathe with one's Rebbe. Now, Kiyasa, and yes, Mayor, I do not need your help. So see, Kiyasa, Rabba, Rav Chana. So Rabbi Rav Chana said, one time, actually no, sorry. So Kiyasa Rabbi Rav Chana Achil Da'isra oil Da'isra. So one time, so Rabbi Rav Chana, he was eating a certain type of fat that was on the stomach. That was it's sort of a questionable whether it's mutri or not. Someplace where noeg iser. So, but he ate it. He was from a place that basically held it was mutter. And Olagabi Rav Avira Saba of the Rabbi Bered Rav Huna, and then came before them Rav Avira Saba and also Rabbi Bered Rav Huna, and Keva the Chazinu Kikasia Minayu. Once he saw them, he basically hid it because he knew that they didn't eat it, right? The guys like eating chol of stam, right? And he sees people who only eat chol of Yisrael, and he sort of hides it, right? So he hid it from this stomach from them, right? This part of the animal. So also they told Abaye, they say, oh, basically he was eating it, and then when he came, he hid it so we couldn't see it. Right? He basically equates you guys like kusim. In other words, he didn't want to go ahead and basically tell you in essence is mutter, because he figured that you're not as learned and you might confuse this with other cases or other parts of the animal, and therefore he basically just said it's better to go ahead and basically hide it and not show them that it's mutter than to go ahead and say, hey, you don't have to be noig iser, it's mutter. The Rabba Bar Chana Lesle. What about that which we learned in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah said, if you recall in the beginning of the parak, which we learned yesterday, we said yesterday that a person, right, it had to do with places that did avoda on Erev Pesach up until Chatzos. So some places are no Gisser, that you shouldn't do any sort of malacha. Other places says you can do malacha up until Chatzos. And then the Mishnah said, always be nohig the goes a little chumrah, right? So if you come from a place that doesn't do malacha, even if you're a place that does do malacha, right, don't do it. Or if you go to a place that doesn't do malacha, and even though you normally do malacha on Erev Pesach, just also don't do it. Go like the chumras. So why didn't over there he go like the chumrah and not eat that part of the animal? So Rabbi Yehani Mili, the bavel, that's only talking about basically when you're going from one place in Bavel to another place in Bavel, basically where they're all on an even playing field in terms of halachic observance and halachic knowledge, from Eretz Yisrael, or from Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, inami, or even for mi Bavel Eretz Yisrael. If you go from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, you should be noheg like Eretz Yisrael. Aval, but in this case, when he was eating this part of the animal, he came from Eretz Yisrael and he was going to Bavel, right? Lo, he doesn't have to over there because Eretz Yisrael is higher than Bavel when it comes to Torah learning and Torah knowledge and halacha, and therefore he's able to go ahead and rely upon the kulas of Eretz Yisrael, even in a makom of Bavel, just not in public. All right, then Kavan the Anan Kafina Lahu Avdina Kavasayu, and since over there, right, we are subordinate basically to Bavel, right, is subordinate to Eretz Yisrael, right? They give it to Eretz Yisrael, so therefore it's not a problem. It's not a violation of our Mishnah. And Ravashi Amar Afilu Temu Eretz Yisrael Bavel, even if you come from Eretz Yisrael Bavel, Hani Mili Heicha the Ein Daitel Achzor. It could also be us, but that's only if he was not going to be chayzer. If he's not going to be chayzer, then he should take upon the chumras of Bavel because he's not going back to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, basically, he's like somebody who lives in Bavel now. Rabbi Rechana daitol achzor havi. However, Rabbi Rechana was basically someone who had intended to go ahead and return to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore he was still able to go ahead and rely upon the kulas of Eretz Yisrael. So Amar le Rabbi Chana lebani sabini loy techa loy bifni v'loy shaloi bifni. However, Rabbi Chana said to son, this part of the stomach, right? You should not eat in front of me below lefanai v'loy shaloi b'fanai. Right? You can't eat in front of me or not. You can't rely on my heter of eating the stomach. You should be noheg. It's iser like in Bavel. However, ani b'mi sharisi as Rabbi Yochanan, I saw the great Rabbi Yochanan she'achal. Right, who ate this? However, I, who saw the great Rabbi Yochanan eat this, I can be relying on him. So even though I saw him and I can rely on him, however, you, right, you didn't see him. Even though you see me, who saw him, that's not the same. You can't rely upon it because you didn't see him, right? You can't see somebody who saw Rabbi Yochanan. Only if you saw Rabbi Yochanan, you can rely on him. And Ata, however, you lo isa, so you didn't see Rabbi Yochanan, lo teichel bein befanav bein shelo befanai, right? You can't go ahead bein befanai bein shelo befanai. However, you can't eat not in front of me or even in front of me. You can't rely upon that kula because you didn't see the original source of the kula, which was Rabbi Yochanan. However, upligi didei adidei. This actually argues with another ma'isa of Rabbi Rechana. Rabbi Rechana sachli Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar. It was told to me by Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar. Pam achas nichnasi achar Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yosi ben Lekunya Legina. One time, I went after I followed Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yosi ben the son of Lekunya into a garden when it was during a Shemitah year. Turn the page. The notal svichi karuv. Right, so now there's a halacha, right? One is not allowed to go ahead and plant on Shemitah, right? And therefore, however, there are certain things that sort of grow on their own, such as cabbages. Cabbages grow on their own, so it's a machlokes as to that which grows from a cabbage, right? If you can go ahead and have that while it's still available, and so he says v'natal svicha karuf. And he took the gross that came even from the cabbage, and he ate it. And he gave it to me. In other words, he was noheg this special heter of eating the growths of this cabbage, even though it was during a Shemitah year, because it was before this man of the beer. Varmeli, and he told me, Beni, my son, right? He says, in front of me, you can eat it. You can, just because I'm eating it, right? And you're allowed, since you see me eating it, you're allowed to go ahead and eat it in front of me, but not in front of me, you can't go ahead and eat it. However, however, since I saw Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai who ate it, therefore I can go ahead and rely upon him, whether he's in front of me or not. However, but you, right? You can only eat in front of me, not in front of me. So, in other words, what's the stira? The contradiction is like this. Earlier, we said if you see the Talmid Chacham who was the source of it, then you can do it. But anybody else who didn't see that original source, Rabbi Yochanan in the first case and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai in the second case, can't eat it at all, right? And according to the second way, we said that even if you saw, he said, since he saw Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and I saw Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai eat it. So therefore, if you're in front of me, you can also go ahead and eat the growths of the cabbage. So it's a contradiction, right? It's a contradiction which the Gemara does not, which it does not answer. Now, the question of the Gemara is, my Rabbi Shimon, what was this Rabbi Shimon? What was he relying upon? The Tani learned in Raisa. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, Kol Svichim Asur Chutz Misviche Karuv. She'ein Kiyetz Ben Beyerek Hasada. So he says all shoots and sprouts that come out on their own afterwards are usher, right, to eat once it's no longer available on the field, except for the growths of the cabbage, because there are no other like it in the field. In other words, that is always available on the field since the cabbage is always away in the field. So therefore, we said earlier, there's a Zman beer, right? Once something is not available in the fields and Shemitah, you can no longer have it in your house, right? You can no longer keep it because it's not available in the fields. However, this type of cabbage is always available in the field. Therefore, it's always a mutter in your house. The Chachamim say no. Kol svichim asur. All types of svichim are asur, even that of karufs, of the cabbage. So they argue as a cabbage. And what's this machlokes over here between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon? The V'tavai only with Rabbi Kiva. They both hold like Rabbi Kiva. The Tanya learn a brisa. Hey, loy nizav loy nesav as tvasenu. So it says over there, right? Right, we're not going to go plant, and we're not going to go ahead and gather, right, our crops. Right. In other words, they want to know, right, how they're going to go ahead and eat. And Amar Rabbi Kiva v'chemiacha zarim mehecha oisvin, and says, well, if they don't plant, how could they gather their crops? They didn't plant anything, right? So over here we see mesvichim shein asurim. Over here we see that sprouts, right, these things that grow on their own, right, are mutter up until a certain point. So over here we see that svichim, they are usur. And b'mai kamifli, and what's the machlokes? Rabbanan sabri gazrin and sviche kruv ato shar sviche, and the Rabbanan held that all of types of sprouts, even that of cabbage, are usur because of, in general, sviche are usur, as we saw according to this, according to Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Shimon saber like is in sviche kruv ato sviche diaman. And Rabbi Shimon says no, we don't make a gzeira. There are exceptions to the rule. One of which is the cabbage, which is always available, and therefore that would be mutter. And therefore that was the reason Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went ahead and ate it. And only those who saw Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai can go ahead and eat it. And if you're in front of somebody who saw Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai who ate it, then you would be mutter for you to go ahead and also eat this during Shemitah. Fine, 2 dots. Now, we had an apparent contradiction yesterday, right? We in one case we said, right, that you should always be the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, we said you should always be noheg, right? You should always go l'chumrah, right? Whether the chumrah, that's in case of working, right? So if you didn't work at home, right, then even if you go to a place where they work, you shouldn't work. And if you go to a place where they're not working, that even though you worked at home, you shouldn't work there. And then it says over there, you shouldn't change from the place you're at because of machlokes. You shouldn't act differently. Now, the Gemara says it's a contradiction. So, I understand in the case where you come from a place where they do malacha, and you go to a place where they're very from, they don't do malacha on Erev Pesach. You do the chumrah in the place that you went, right? You go to Bnei Brak, so you don't do the malacha there. And therefore you don't do different. You're not like them. You're not like chumrah. You don't work, and therefore there's no machlokes. And therefore you don't do any work. Ella, if, however, Ella mimakom shein oisin, but let's say you come from Bnei Brak to a place where they don't do malacha before, and then you go to the makom shein, and then all of a sudden let's say you go to Chicago where they do work on Erev Pesach. So you should go to chumrah. You should go like they do in Bnei Brak, right, and not work. So, but what about al yishna adam ifnei machlokes? Then it says you shouldn't do different than the people where you're at because of machlokes. Then you have it, and therefore because of that you should do malacha, right? You're in Chicago now. We said earlier you should always go to chumrah. So if you come from Bnei Brak where they don't do malacha, so when you come to Chicago, you should still not do it because you should go to chumrah. But then it says on the other hand, you should not deviate from the place where you're at, so there's no machlokes. The Gemara says, Amar Abaye, a reisha. Maybe it's only going to reisha. It means only in the other case. When you come from Chicago and then you go to Bnei Brak, you should go to Chumrah because in Bnei Brak they don't do malacha, and also you're doing the same as them, and therefore there is no machlokes. And Rava says, no, Yelam Seifa, really, you keep going in the Seifa. And the opposite way. This means to say, Ein bezum mipnei shinui machlokes. You're not going to cause machlokes if you come from Bnei Brak and you come to Chicago and you don't do malacha, everyone else is working and you're not. So my comment, what are the people going to say? Haray Amir malacha asura. They're going to say, oh, the reason why you're not working today is because you think malacha is asur. No, they're going to say this guy, he didn't have any work, right? So he didn't have any work today, so that's the reason why he's not working, not because he says it's asur, because it's not working. So therefore, it's not a clear contradiction that would cause an argument, and therefore it would be no problem to basically abstain from work. If you're coming from a place that normally does not do work, you can go to a place where everyone else is working and you abstain from work because people will just say, you're lazy. All right, we'll stop here. Shkoyach, everybody.
Shkoyach.